My name is Margaret Wilson, and at 67, I never imagined my retirement years would include being charged rent by my own son, Brian. 5 years a widow, I gifted our family home to him out of love, never expecting that generosity would lead to betrayal. When Brian and Ashley slid that rent agreement across the dinner table, something broke inside me. 3 weeks later, I stood watching their faces as they opened my eviction notice. If you are currently caring for aging parents or planning your estate, please listen carefully. Before I continue, let me know where you are watching from in the comments, and please hit that like and subscribe button if family stories of resilience speak to you. I suppose the best place to start is at the beginning. Frank and I met during our sophomore year of college in 1976. He was studying business administration, and I was pursuing my nursing degree. We married right after graduation and spent our first 2 years in a tiny apartment that barely fit our second-hand furniture. Those were lean times, but we were happy just being together. When I became pregnant with Brian in 1982, we realized we needed more space. Finding our family home was a struggle. Interest rates were sky high, nearly 16%, and Frank worked 2 jobs while I picked up extra hospital shifts despite my growing belly. Somehow, we scraped together a down payment and purchased our modest 4-bedroom colonial in a quiet Michigan suburb. I still remember Frank carrying me across the threshold, both of us laughing because my 8th-month pregnant belly made it nearly impossible. Brian was born 3 weeks later, and the house quickly filled with the sounds of family. His sister Sandra followed 3 years after. While Frank built his career at an automotive supplier, I worked night shifts at the local hospital so one of us could always be home with the children. Those years were exhausting but fulfilling. Our house became the neighborhood gathering spot where children played in our fenced backyard, while parents chatted over coffee at my kitchen table. As the children grew, so did our family traditions. Every Sunday was pancake breakfast, where Frank flipped his famous blueberry pancakes while the kids set the table. Brian was always his father's shadow, following him around during weekend projects, learning to fix leaky faucets and patch drywall. Sandra was my kitchen helper, standing on a stool to reach the counter as we baked cookies and holiday treats. During summer breaks, we took camping trips to the Upper Peninsula, where Brian developed his love for fishing. Frank taught him patience while they waited for bites at the lake, a quality I would later see in his work as a software developer. Sandra preferred exploring the forest trails with me, collecting interesting rocks and identifying wildflowers. Those precious memories sustained me through the harder times that would come. We celebrated every milestone in that house. Birthdays, graduations, Brian and Sandra's departures for college, their returns with laundry and stories, and eventually, Sandra's move to California for work and Brian's engagement to Ashley. They married 10 years ago in our backyard, under an arch Frank built specifically for the occasion. Ashley was lovely that day, and I welcomed her warmly into our family, hopeful for the close mother and daughter-in-law relationship I had always wanted. Initially, things were good between us. Ashley would join me for shopping trips and ask for my recipes. She seemed genuinely interested in family stories and traditions. Frank and I were delighted when Jason was born 8 years ago, followed by Emma 3 years later. Being grandparents brought us immeasurable joy, and our home once again echoed with children's laughter during weekend visits. When Frank complained of indigestion during our 40th anniversary dinner, I never imagined it would be our last meal together. The heart attack was massive and sudden. Despite my nursing background, despite the paramedics arriving within minutes, despite everything medical science could offer, he was gone. My partner of 40 years, the foundation of our family, vanished from our lives. The grief was overwhelming. For months, I wandered through our home like a ghost, touching his things, sleeping in his recliner rather than our bed. The children were supportive, with Sandra flying in regularly from California, and Brian bringing the grandchildren over more frequently. Ashley organized meals from neighbors and helped with paperwork. In those early days of grief, our family drew closer and I was grateful. As time passed, the house began feeling too empty, too full of echoes. Maintaining it became increasingly difficult on my own. The yard Frank had meticulously cared for started looking neglected despite my best efforts. Climbing the stairs aggravated my arthritic knee. When I retired from nursing 3 years ago, my pension combined with Frank's Social Security provided comfort, but not luxury. Property taxes and maintenance costs consumed a significant portion of my monthly income. It was during this period that I began considering my options and the future of our family home. The idea came to me gradually. Brian and Ashley had been renting a small townhouse since their marriage, saving for a home of their own. With 2 growing children, they needed more space but struggled with rising housing costs. Meanwhile, I rattled around in a house too large for one person, climbing stairs that increasingly protested along with my knees. Our family home sat on a quarter-acre lot in a neighborhood that had appreciated significantly over the decades. The 4-bedroom, 3-bathroom colonial featured the garden Frank and I had nurtured for years, with perennial flowers that bloomed in succession from early spring through late fall. The kitchen we had remodeled for our 30th anniversary still looked contemporary with its granite countertops and cherry cabinets. The finished basement served as a playroom for the grandchildren, filled with toys and the same foosball table that Brian and his friends had enjoyed as teenagers. During a Sunday dinner at Brian and Ashley's cramped townhouse, I watched Emma and Jason squabbling over limited space in their shared bedroom, and made my decision. "I want to give you the house," I announced after the children had been excused. The stunned silence that followed was broken by Brian's stammered protests about my financial security. I explained that my accountant had outlined potential tax benefits to gifting the property while I was alive rather than leaving it as an inheritance. The house was fully paid off, and transferring ownership would eliminate my property tax burden. "But where would you live, Mom?" Brian asked, concern evident in his expression. "The guest suite would be perfect for me," I suggested. Frank had converted the downstairs den into a bedroom with attached bathroom when my mother briefly lived with us years earlier. "It would give me privacy but keep me close to family. And you all would have the space you need." Ashley's eyes lit up as she mentally redecorated my home of 35 years. "We could convert the upstairs office into a proper bedroom for Emma," she said excitedly. While Brian and Ashley discussed possibilities, I felt a mixture of emotions. Relief at finding a practical solution, satisfaction at being able to help my son, and a twinge of sadness at the thought of relinquishing the home Frank and I had built together. The next day I called my longtime friend and lawyer, Richard Goldman, to discuss the legalities. His bushy eyebrows raised in concern as I outlined my plan. "Margaret, have you considered asking for a life estate?" he asked, pulling out a legal pad. "That would give you the legal right to live in the property for the remainder of your life, while they would own it and be responsible for taxes and maintenance." I waved away his suggestion. "That seems unnecessarily complicated, Richard. This is my son we're talking about. I trust him completely." Richard looked unconvinced but nodded. "At least let me draft a simple agreement stating their understanding that you'll continue living there." Even that seemed excessive to me at the time. We're family. A handshake and their word are enough. My friend Elaine was more direct during our weekly coffee meeting. "Margaret, you're being naive," she said bluntly. "Family dynamics change when property and money are involved. Protect yourself." "You don't understand," I replied, slightly offended. "Brian is Frank's son through and through, honorable to his core. Besides, Ashley has always treated me with respect." Elaine sighed but dropped the subject. Looking back, I wish I had heeded both her and Richard's warnings. The formal gifting process was relatively straightforward. I signed the deed transfer documents in Richard's office, officially transferring ownership of the property valued at approximately $450,000 to Brian and Ashley. The only condition I requested was verbal, that I would have a home there as long as I needed it. They readily agreed, with Brian hugging me tightly and Ashley wiping away what appeared to be tears of gratitude. "You'll always have a home with us, Mom," Brian promised solemnly. "This changes our financial future completely, and we can never thank you enough." Ashley added, "We'll take care of everything. You just enjoy your retirement without worrying about maintenance or expenses." That evening we celebrated with a special dinner at my house, soon to be theirs. I prepared Frank's famous pot roast recipe, and Brian opened an expensive bottle of champagne. As we toasted to new beginnings, I handed them the keys with a flourish, feeling generous and loved. Jason and Emma raced upstairs to choose their new bedrooms, their excited voices floating down to where the adults sat discussing renovation plans. The following weeks were a flurry of activity as Brian and Ashley prepared to sell their townhouse and move into the family home. I began the emotional process of sorting through decades of accumulated possessions, deciding what to keep in my significantly reduced living space, and what to distribute among family members or donate. Each item held memories: the dining room set where we had gathered for countless family meals, the living room furniture where we had opened Christmas presents year after year, the master bedroom suite where Frank and I had shared whispered conversations late into the night. Parting with these pieces felt like saying goodbye to chapters of my life, but I reminded myself that they would remain in the family, continuing to serve new generations. Moving into the guest suite required significant downsizing. I selected my favorite bedroom set from the spare room upstairs, my reading chair, a small desk, and a few cherished decorative items. The attached bathroom was comfortable though not spacious, and I arranged my toiletries and medications in the cabinet, maintaining my nursing sense of order. Brian and Ashley moved in on a Saturday in June, with friends helping transport their belongings and position furniture. I made myself scarce, taking the grandchildren to the park while the moving truck unloaded and adults rearranged the house to suit the new owner's preferences. That evening we ordered pizza and ate picnic style in the backyard, toasting with lemonade to what I believed would be a harmonious multi-generational living arrangement. Initially, I was content with the new situation. I enjoyed hearing the children's footsteps overhead in the morning, and their excited voices when they returned from school. Having my son and his family around me eased the loneliness that had persisted since Frank's passing. I helped with childcare when needed and prepared occasional meals for everyone, falling into a routine that seemed beneficial for all involved. Little did I know how quickly this arrangement would unravel. The changes were subtle at first, so gradual that I almost convinced myself I was imagining things. About 2 months after they moved in, I noticed I was no longer automatically included in family dinners. The first time it happened, Ashley seemed surprised when I appeared in the doorway as they were sitting down to eat. "Oh, Margaret, I didn't make enough for everyone," she said, her tone apologetic but her eyes not meeting mine. "I thought you might want some privacy tonight." I retreated to my room with a sandwich, telling myself it was a simple misunderstanding. But soon these misunderstandings became more frequent. Family meals that had once been central to our household traditions became exclusive events that occasionally included me, usually when Brian specifically mentioned my presence to Ashley. The kitchen, once my domain, gradually became territory where I felt like an intruder. Ashley rearranged cupboards without consulting me, placing everyday items on higher shelves that challenged my arthritic reach. When I cooked, I would later find my pots and pans rewashed and placed in different locations, with Ashley explaining, "I just have a specific system I prefer." My suggestions about the children's care were increasingly met with tight smiles and variations of parenting approaches have changed since your day, Margaret. When I mentioned that Jason might benefit from reading before bedtime as Brian had, Ashley responded that screen time was educational now. My nursing background was dismissed when I suggested Emma's persistent cough warranted a doctor visit. Ashley insisted it was just allergies until the child developed bronchitis 2 weeks later. The situation worsened when Ashley's mother, Patricia, moved in temporarily following her divorce. Patricia took the second largest bedroom upstairs, which had been Frank's office and still contained some of his books and memorabilia. These were boxed and relocated to the garage without my knowledge. When I discovered them in damaged condition after a rainstorm leaked through the garage roof, Ashley seemed more concerned about the water spot on her car than the ruined photos and books. "They're just things, Margaret," she said dismissively. "We can't keep everything forever." With Patricia's arrival, the household dynamics shifted further against me. The two women often spoke in hushed tones that abruptly changed to artificial cheerfulness when I entered a room. Patricia, unlike me, was automatically included in meal planning and family outings. I frequently found myself alone on weekends while they took the children to activities, learning about these plans only through photos posted on social media. One evening, I overheard an unguarded conversation between Ashley and Patricia in the kitchen. "How long do you think she'll be staying with us?" Patricia asked. "I don't know, Mom," Ashley sighed. "Brian feels responsible for her, but honestly, having his mother here is becoming a burden. She's always watching, always there." "You need your space as a young family," Patricia agreed. There are nice senior communities where she could have friends her own age. I tiptoed back to my room, heart pounding with the realization that I was considered an unwelcome guest in what had been my home for decades. Meanwhile, Brian was increasingly absent, working longer hours as his software company underwent restructuring. When he was home, he seemed distracted and tense, our once close relationship reduced to brief pleasantries as he passed my room heading upstairs. When I tried discussing my concerns, he deflected with comments about work stress and promised we would talk properly soon. A conversation that never materialized. Financial tensions added to the strained atmosphere. The first utility bill after their move prompted a family meeting, where Ashley presented a spreadsheet of household expenses. Since we're all adults sharing a home, she explained, we thought it would be fair to split costs according to usage. The formula she devised somehow calculated that my fair share represented nearly 40% of utilities, despite my occupying less than 20% of the living space. When I questioned this, Ashley presented complex justifications about my daytime presence in the house while they were at work and school, and my excessive water usage due to my preference for baths over showers. Brian sat silently during this discussion, studying his hands. I began contributing $300 monthly toward household expenses, straining my fixed income but hoping this financial contribution would ease tensions. It didn't. Complaints continued about everything from the television volume when I watched evening news to the smell of my morning coffee disrupting Ashley's scent-free preference for the house. Maintenance issues in my suite went unaddressed despite repeated mentions. The slow drain in my bathroom sink remained clogged, my ceiling light flickered undependably, and the draft from my poorly sealed window intensified as summer turned to fall. When I finally called a plumber myself, Ashley intercepted him at the door, canceling the appointment because now wasn't a good time, and they had their own contractor. My friends gradually stopped visiting after several uncomfortable encounters with Ashley, who made it clear they were inconveniencing the family. My bridge club, which had met at my home monthly for 20 years, relocated to Elaine's apartment after Ashley complained about parking issues and noise disturbances. By Christmas, 6 months after the property transfer, I had become effectively isolated in my own room, venturing out primarily when the house was empty. I ate simple meals prepared in the microwave Richard had given me as a housewarming gift, though we both knew it was to provide me some independence from the increasingly hostile kitchen environment. My only consistent joy came from my grandchildren, who still sought me out for stories and cookies when their parents weren't monitoring. Jason would sneak into my room after school, ostensibly to show me his artwork, but really to enjoy the chocolate chip cookies I kept hidden in my nightstand. Emma would request brushing practice for her emerging reading skills, cuddled beside me in my reading chair. These precious moments sustained me through increasingly difficult days. As winter deepened, so did my realization that my living situation had become untenable. Yet I struggled with options. My savings were modest, retirement housing was expensive, and the thought of leaving my grandchildren created a physical ache in my chest. I clung to hope that the situation would improve, that Brian would recognize what was happening and intervene, that Ashley might soften her approach. Instead, the final breaking point approached with the inexorability of an advancing storm. February arrived with biting cold and gray skies that matched my increasingly somber mood. The tension in the house had become so thick it felt like another presence, following me from room to room. Even the children had grown quieter, sensing the undercurrents of adult conflict without understanding its source. On the second Saturday of the month, Ashley announced a special family dinner. Everyone dress nicely, she instructed, her tone leaving no room for questions. We have important matters to discuss. That evening I selected one of my few remaining nice outfits, a blue sweater Frank had always complimented paired with my good slacks. I applied makeup for the first time in weeks and secured my silver hair in a neat bun, wanting to present myself with dignity despite my growing unease. The dining room looked formal with the good china I had gifted them displayed on the table. Jason and Emma sat subdued in their Sunday clothes, picking at unfamiliar gourmet food Ashley had prepared. Patricia occupied what had once been Frank's chair at the head of the table, while Brian sat beside Ashley, avoiding my gaze. Conversation remained stilted through the main course, focused on safe topics like the children's school activities and an upcoming community event. As Ashley served dessert, an elaborate tiramisu that bore no resemblance to the simple apple crisp the children preferred, Brian cleared his throat. "Mom, Ashley and I have been discussing the household situation," he began, his voice attempting professional detachment. "As you know, maintaining this property involves significant expenses." I nodded cautiously, setting down my fork as apprehension built in my chest. "Property taxes have increased 12% this year," he continued. "The water heater needed replacement last month, and the homeowner's insurance premium has nearly doubled due to recent weather events in the county. I've been contributing to expenses," I reminded him gently. Ashley interjected, her tone brisk. "Your contribution doesn't adequately cover your portion of the household costs, Margaret. We've calculated that a fair monthly rent would be $800. The word rent landed like a physical blow. I stared at her, certain I had misheard. "Rent? In my own home?" "Our home, legally speaking," Ashley corrected, sliding a typed document across the table. "This is a formal rental agreement outlining terms, including utilities and common area usage hours." My hands trembled as I lifted the paper, scanning terms that restricted my kitchen access to specific hours, limited my visitors to pre-approved daytime guests, and even specified which bathroom the grandchildren should use when visiting my room. "This isn't what we agreed to," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Brian, you promised I would always have a home here." My son finally met my eyes, discomfort evident in his expression. "Technically, Mom, we never formalized that arrangement. The house transfer was unconditional. We're being incredibly generous," Ashley added, her voice taking on the patient tone one might use with a confused child. "Market rate for a suite like yours would be at least $1,100. We're offering family pricing." "I gave you this house," I reminded them, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Everything you have here came from my generosity. And we appreciated that gift," Ashley replied smoothly. "But that was then, and this is our reality now. We have expenses, college funds to build, our own retirement to consider." I looked to Brian, hoping to see some recognition of the injustice unfolding, but he studied the table's surface. "We need to establish proper boundaries," he murmured. "This arrangement isn't working as it is. What happens if I can't afford this rent?" I asked, already knowing the answer from the exchange of glances between them. Ashley straightened the salt and pepper shakers before responding. "We've been researching senior living facilities. There's a nice one 20 minutes from here that has vacancies. Your pension should cover it, especially if you qualify for their income-based discount." "That's a nursing home," I said flatly, recognizing the facility from my years in healthcare. "It's a continuum of care community," she corrected. "They have independent living apartments in the same building as the memory care unit," I noted. "I don't need that level of care." "Not yet," Patricia interjected with what seemed like satisfaction. "But planning ahead is sensible." The conversation's true purpose suddenly crystallized. "You want my room for something else," I stated, not a question but a realization. Brian shifted uncomfortably before Ashley answered. "Jason deserves his own bedroom. He's getting too old to share with his sister, and this arrangement would be temporary until we can convert the basement into a proper suite for you. The basement that flooded twice yearly. The basement with its steep stairs my arthritic knees could barely navigate. The basement where Frank's damaged belongings now languished in moldy boxes." "I see," I said quietly, folding the rental agreement and placing it beside my untouched dessert. "Thank you for your honesty. I need some time to consider this." I rose from the table on unsteady legs, aware of Emma's confused expression and Jason's worried eyes tracking my movement. As I retreated to my room, I heard Ashley telling the children in a falsely bright voice, "Grandma's just tired. Who wants ice cream with their dessert?" Once alone, I sank onto my bed as the full reality of my situation crashed over me. Tears I had been suppressing flowed freely now. The home Frank and I had created, the place where we had raised our children and stored decades of memories, was no longer mine in any sense. Worse, my own son, the baby I had nursed through colic and comforted through nightmares, had participated in this betrayal. Sleep eluded me that night as I cycled through shock, grief, and eventually a slow-burning anger. Around 3 in the morning, I retrieved my cell phone and dialed Sandra in California, disregarding the time difference in my need to speak with someone who might understand. "Mom," she answered groggily. "Is everything okay?" The concern in her voice unleashed a fresh wave of tears as I recounted the evening's events. Her initial shock quickly transformed into outrage. "They did what?" she exclaimed, fully awake now. "After you gave them the house? That's beyond ungrateful, it's cruel." "I don't know what to do," I admitted. "I can't afford that rent on my pension, and I can't bear the thought of that nursing home." "Come live with me," Sandra offered immediately. "Michael and I have the guest room, and San Diego's weather would be better for your arthritis anyway." The offer was tempting, but relocating across the country at my age presented its own challenges. My doctors are here, my few remaining friends. Starting over somewhere new seems overwhelming. "Then we'll figure something else out," Sandra insisted. "But you can't stay there being treated like an unwanted tenant. I'm coming to Michigan next week. Don't sign anything until I get there." After ending the call, I sat at my small desk and began calculating options. My monthly income from pension and Social Security totaled $2,400. Rent for even a modest apartment in our suburb would consume more than half that amount. Moving costs, security deposits, and new furniture would quickly deplete my modest savings. The financial reality was as bleak as my emotional landscape. Yet beneath the practical concerns lay a deeper wound, the shattering of trust in my son and the family bonds I had believed unbreakable. As dawn lightened my window, I reached a painful conclusion. Regardless of practical challenges, I could not remain in a home where I was neither wanted nor respected. The only question remaining was how to extricate myself with my dignity intact. The morning after the confrontation, I maintained a semblance of my normal routine, making my bed with hospital corners as I had done for decades and dressing carefully despite having nowhere particular to go. When I heard the front door close as Brian left for work and Ashley departed to drive the children to school, I emerged from my room to make a vital phone call from the privacy of the kitchen. "Richard Goldman's office," his receptionist answered. "Marilyn, it's Margaret Wilson. I need to speak with Richard as soon as possible. It's urgent." Perhaps something in my voice communicated the gravity of the situation, for Richard agreed to see me during his lunch break that same day. I quickly dressed in my warmest coat, called a rideshare service using the app Sandra had installed on my phone during her last visit, and left the house without leaving a note. For the first time since moving into the guest suite, I felt no obligation to explain my whereabouts. Richard's law office occupied the second floor of a converted Victorian in the downtown area. He met me at the door himself, concern evident in his expression as he ushered me into his wood-paneled consultation room. "You look exhausted, Margaret," he observed, ordering tea from his receptionist before settling behind his desk. "What's happened?" I recounted the previous night's conversation without embellishment, finishing by placing Ashley's rental agreement on his desk. Richard reviewed it silently, his frown deepening as he turned each page. "This is unconscionable," he finally stated, removing his reading glasses. "Unfortunately, it's not necessarily illegal." "What are my options?" I asked directly. Richard sighed heavily. "Legally speaking, they're limited. The property transfer was unconditional, as you insisted at the time." His tone held no reproach, but I winced nonetheless. "Without a written agreement ensuring your right to occupy the property, you're essentially in the position of a houseguest whose welcome has expired. So they can simply evict me if I don't pay this rent? They would need to follow proper eviction procedures, which would give you some time. But yes, ultimately they have that legal right." I absorbed this painful confirmation in silence. Marilyn entered with tea, providing a momentary reprieve from the difficult conversation. "What would you do, Richard?" I asked after she departed. "Not as my lawyer, but as my friend?" Richard considered for a long moment before answering. "I would refuse to be exploited by people who have already benefited from my generosity. I would take whatever control remains available to me and make my own choices before having them imposed." His words resonated with a growing resolve within me. "Could you help me find appropriate housing? Something modest but decent." "Of course," he promised. I have several clients in real estate who could show you options within your budget. But Margaret, don't rush this decision. You have rights as an occupant, regardless of ownership. They cannot legally change the locks or remove your belongings without formal proceedings. I thanked him and departed with a list of resources and a slightly stronger sense of purpose. Instead of returning immediately to the house, I directed my rideshare driver to Elaine's condominium complex across town. My oldest friend welcomed me with open arms and immediate understanding. "You're staying with me until this is sorted," she declared after hearing a condensed version of events. "My spare room is small but completely yours for as long as needed." Her generosity brought fresh tears to my eyes. "I can't impose that way." "Nonsense." Elaine dismissed my protest. "After Frank died, you had me over for dinner every Sunday for 6 months to make sure I was eating properly. Friends support each other, Margaret. It's not negotiable." Over coffee at her kitchen table, we discussed practical considerations of my situation. As a retired librarian, Elaine approached problems methodically, helping me create lists of necessary tasks. Researching affordable housing options, determining what possessions I would need immediately versus what could be stored, calculating a realistic budget for independent living. The emotional aspects are hardest, I admitted. I keep wondering where I went wrong with Brian, how he could participate in this treatment of his own mother. Elaine reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "This isn't about your parenting, Margaret. Adult children make their own choices. And frankly, I suspect Ashley's influence is substantial here. But he's allowing it," I pointed out. "That's what hurts most. People disappoint us," she said gently, "even those we raised and loved most deeply. The question now is how you'll respond to that disappointment." That evening, I returned to the house with a clearer perspective. Ashley acknowledged my presence with obvious surprise, having apparently expected me to remain sequestered in my room after the previous night's conversation. "The children missed you at breakfast," she mentioned, her tone suggesting an accusation. "I had appointments," I replied simply, offering no further explanation as I continued to my room. Over the next week, I methodically explored my options while maintaining a calm exterior. Each day while the house was empty, I researched housing alternatives, consulted with financial advisors Richard recommended, and quietly inventoried my possessions. I opened a new bank account at a different institution from the one Brian and I had shared since his childhood, transferring most of my funds as a precaution. During a visit to First Community Bank, I had an enlightening conversation with the manager, Teresa Reynolds, who specialized in senior financial concerns. "Unfortunately, your situation isn't uncommon," she told me after I explained my circumstances. "Family property transfers without proper legal protections frequently lead to elder displacement." "I trusted my son," I said, the words still painful to articulate. Teresa nodded sympathetically. "Trust is natural in families, but legal protection is prudent. Moving forward, let's focus on establishing your financial independence." She helped me establish automatic deposits for my pension and Social Security payments, and suggested a monthly budget that would allow for independent living while preserving my modest savings. I left feeling more confident about my financial future, despite its limitations. On day 8 after the rent demand, I visited Lakeside Apartments, a modest but well-maintained senior community 10 miles from Brian's house. The one-bedroom unit available featured accessibility modifications including grab bars in the bathroom and lever door handles that would accommodate my arthritis. The rent would consume nearly 60% of my monthly income, but utilities were included, and the complex offered transportation services to medical appointments and grocery shopping. "We have several retired nurses living here," the property manager mentioned during my tour. "They've formed quite a social group. Bridge games on Tuesdays, I believe." The thought of reconnecting with colleagues and rebuilding a social network appealed to me deeply after months of increasing isolation. I submitted an application that afternoon, listing Richard as my reference and emergency contact. Walking through the complex's garden area, I encountered Dorothy Simmons, a neighbor from my old street who had moved there the previous year following her husband's death. "Margaret Wilson," she exclaimed, embracing me warmly. "Are you considering moving here?" When I explained my situation in broad terms, she nodded with unexpected understanding. My sister went through something similar with her daughter's family. Gave them her house, ended up in the basement with a hot plate. Finally left when they started borrowing from her Social Security deposits. How is she now? I asked, dreading the answer. Dorothy smiled. Happier than she's been in years. Lives in a place like this in Grand Rapids, serves as the resident gardening expert, started dating a gentleman from her church group. Says the hardest part was leaving, but she's never regretted it. This conversation strengthened my resolve. That evening I sat alone in my room examining old family photographs. Images of Brian as a toddler on Frank's shoulders, as a teenager proudly displaying his science fair ribbon, as a college graduate with his arm around my shoulders, his expression full of promise and hope. Alongside these memories lay the reality of the man who now barely acknowledged my presence in hallway passings. In one particular photo taken on his 10th birthday, Brian beamed at the camera, missing front teeth creating a gap in his smile, eyes shining with the uncomplicated happiness of childhood. What had happened to that loving boy? Had he always harbored the capacity for such callousness, or had life's pressures and influences gradually eroded his empathy? Would confronting him directly make any difference, or would it simply provide Ashley another opportunity to position me as difficult and demanding? These questions circled without resolution as I carefully returned the photos to their album. Whatever Brian's reasoning or motivations, the situation had become untenable. My course was clear, though the path would be painful. The following morning I called Richard. I've made my decision, I told him. I want to leave on my terms, not theirs. And I want them to understand the consequences of their actions. What are you thinking? He asked cautiously. I want you to prepare an eviction notice, I said, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. From me to them. Richard was silent for a moment before responding. Technically, you can't evict them from property they legally own, Margaret. I understand that, I acknowledged. But they need to experience how it feels to receive such a document from family. Can you draft something that makes the point without making legal claims we can't support? 2 days later, Richard's messenger delivered an official-looking envelope to my room. Inside was a document bearing an impressive letterhead and formal language. Though not legally binding, it detailed the moral contract that had been broken and formally notified Brian and Ashley Wilson that Margaret Wilson would be vacating the premises in 30 days, at which time all familial support, including emergency childcare, holiday meal preparation, and potential future financial gifts or inheritances would cease. The language was Richard's, but the sentiment was entirely mine. This would be my declaration of independence, my refusal to be treated as an inconvenience rather than a beloved family member. That evening, I placed the sealed envelope on the dining room table where they would find it after returning from Emma's school concert, an event to which I had not been invited. Then I retreated to my room, closed the door, and waited for the inevitable confrontation. The slam of the front door announced their return home just after 9 o'clock. I sat in my reading chair, outwardly calm though my heart raced as I listened to their movements through the house. Children's voices drifted down the hallway, followed by Ashley's instructions about brushing teeth and preparing for bed. Then silence, broken only by the sound of chairs moving in the dining room where they must have discovered the envelope. Minutes passed before rapid footsteps approached my door. Brian knocked once, sharply, before pushing it open without waiting for my response. "What is this?" he demanded, holding the open document, his face flushed with anger and confusion. "It's an eviction notice," I replied evenly. "Not legally binding, of course, since I don't own the property anymore. But I wanted you to experience receiving such a document from family." Ashley appeared behind him, her expression tight. "This is completely inappropriate, Margaret. If you wanted to discuss our arrangement further, there are mature ways to communicate. Like presenting a rental agreement at what was supposed to be a family dinner?" I countered, rising slowly from my chair. "I'm simply responding in kind." "Mom," Brian's tone shifted to exasperation. "We weren't evicting you. We were trying to establish fair contributions to household expenses. By charging your mother rent in the home she gifted you," I clarified, "after promising I would always have a place here." "Circumstances change," Ashley interjected. "We have financial responsibilities you don't seem to understand." "I understand perfectly," I assured her. "Which is why I'm leaving. You'll have the entire house available to do with as you please, and I'll have my dignity intact." Brian appeared genuinely shocked. "Where would you go? You can't afford an apartment on your pension." "I've secured housing at Lakeside Apartments," I informed them, taking private satisfaction in their surprise that I had already taken concrete steps. "I move in 3 weeks." "That's nearly 10 miles away," Brian protested. "How will you see the children? Or get to your medical appointments?" "The same way I've been managing for months," I replied. "By making my own arrangements without relying on family who see me as a burden." Ashley's expression hardened. "You're being dramatic. We never called you a burden." "Not to my face," I acknowledged. "But the walls in this house aren't soundproof, Ashley." Her slight flush confirmed she understood exactly which conversation I had overheard. Brian looked between us, confusion evident in his expression. "This is unnecessary, Mom." He tried again. "We can renegotiate the terms. Maybe reduce the contribution amount." "It's not about the money, Brian. It's about respect and keeping promises. You've demonstrated your priorities clearly, and I've made my decision accordingly." They left my room without resolution, Ashley muttering about emotional manipulation, while Brian appeared troubled but unwilling to stand against his wife. That night, for the first time in weeks, I slept soundly, the clarity of my decision bringing unexpected peace. The following 2 weeks passed in uncomfortable silence. Brian made 2 additional attempts at conversation, once suggesting a family meeting to resolve the situation and later offering to reduce my contribution to a symbolic amount. I declined both overtures, recognizing them as reactions to consequences rather than genuine understanding of the underlying betrayal. Ashley shifted between cold silence and artificial pleasantness when the children were present, clearly concerned about how they might perceive the growing tension. Patricia watched the unfolding situation with barely concealed satisfaction, occasionally making comments about retirement communities being best for everyone involved. On day 15 after delivering my notice, I received an unexpected visitor. Sandra arrived unannounced, having flown in from California despite her demanding job as a software engineer. "You shouldn't have to face this alone," she declared, embracing me tightly in the driveway where she intercepted me returning from a doctor's appointment. Ashley's surprise at finding Sandra in the kitchen preparing tea was evident. The sisters-in-law had never been close, their fundamentally different values creating a polite but distant relationship. "I came to help Mom with her move," Sandra stated before Ashley could question her presence, "and to understand exactly how this situation developed." The resulting conversation between Sandra, Brian, and Ashley quickly escalated, with my daughter directly challenging the treatment I had received. "She gave you a $400,000 house," Sandra emphasized, her voice rising despite my hand on her arm urging restraint. "And you respond by charging her rent and making her feel unwelcome? What kind of gratitude is that?" "We have expenses," Ashley defended, "and boundaries are healthy in multigenerational homes." "Boundaries, yes."
Exploitation, no, Sandra countered.
"There's a significant difference." Brian appeared increasingly uncomfortable as the conversation continued, eventually retreating to his home office without resolving anything. That evening, he avoided family dinner, claiming work deadlines required his attention. Sandra's presence changed the household dynamic dramatically. She stayed in my room, sleeping on an air mattress she purchased, and spent her days helping me sort possessions and prepare for the move. Her protective stance gave me strength during a physically and emotionally exhausting process. The children sensed the tension, with Emma asking directly why Grandma was leaving. Sandra answered before Ashley could intervene. "Sometimes adults need their own special places," she explained gently. "Grandma will have a nice apartment where you can visit and have sleepovers sometimes." "Will it have cookies?" Jason asked seriously. "Always," I promised, hugging him tightly. Unexpectedly, my grandson proved more perceptive than his father. The day after Sandra's arrival, Jason knocked on my door during his mother's grocery outing. "Mom and Dad were fighting about you," he confided, sitting cross-legged on my bed. "Dad said they should never have asked for money, and Mom said they couldn't afford to support everyone." Adult problems are complicated, I told him, careful not to criticize his parents despite my hurt. But none of this is your fault, and I will always be your grandma, no matter where I live. Dad seems sad, Jason observed. He was looking at old pictures last night in his office. This glimpse into Brian's private struggle offered a small comfort, suggesting he at least felt some conflict about the situation. However, he continued avoiding direct conversation with me, communicating primarily through Sandra about logistical details of my move. The wider family dynamics grew increasingly complex as news of the situation spread through our extended network. Brian's cousin Thomas, always close to Frank, called to express his disapproval. Several of my former nursing colleagues arranged a moving brigade to help with packing and transportation. My sister Elizabeth called daily from Florida, offering financial assistance I politely declined. Ashley's reputation in our community suffered as the circumstances became known, with several mothers from the children's school noticeably cooling toward her according to Sandra's observations during school pickup. This social consequence appeared to affect Ashley more than any moral arguments about her treatment of me. 3 weeks after delivering my notice, moving day arrived. Richard had helped me secure a small moving company at a discounted rate, and Sandra had coordinated volunteers to assist. The modest furnishings from my suite were loaded efficiently, along with boxes containing personal possessions I had accumulated over decades. Photo albums, Frank's letters, treasured books, and family heirlooms I had retained. Brian finally approached me as the last boxes were being loaded, his expression troubled. "Mom, this still feels unnecessary. We could have worked something out." "Perhaps," I acknowledged. "But this way is cleaner for everyone. You'll have the space you wanted, and I'll have my independence." "Will you still see the children?" he asked, genuine concern evident in his voice. "That depends on whether you and Ashley are willing to facilitate visits," I answered honestly. "My door will always be open to them." He nodded, seemingly unable to find appropriate words for the moment. As I prepared to leave, Emma and Jason clung to me, extracting promises about visits and phone calls. I held them tightly, assuring them of my continued presence in their lives regardless of physical distance. Ashley maintained her composure during the departure, offering a stiff, "Good luck with your new place," that suggested relief rather than regret. Patricia didn't bother concealing her satisfaction, immediately discussing renovation plans for my former suite within my hearing. As the moving truck pulled away, I looked back at the house that had contained nearly 4 decades of my life. The garden Frank and I had tended together showed signs of neglect, with untrimmed roses and volunteer maple saplings sprouting among the perennials. The blue shutters needed repainting, and the porch swing we had installed for our 20th anniversary was missing a slat. Like my relationship with my son, the house had changed in ways both subtle and profound. Letting go hurt deeply, yet as we drove toward my new beginning, I felt the first tentative stirrings of relief beneath the sadness. Sandra squeezed my hand as if reading my thoughts. "You're going to be okay, Mom," she assured me. Better than okay. For the first time in months, I believed that might actually be true. 1 year has passed since I moved into Lakeside Apartments. My 1-bedroom unit has slowly transformed from an unfamiliar space into a true home. The walls, once rental white, now display framed family photos and artwork I've collected over decades. My reading chair sits by the window overlooking a small garden where residents maintain flower beds and vegetable plots. The kitchen, though compact, accommodates my modest cooking needs and the occasional baking session when the grandchildren visit. The transition wasn't easy. Those first weeks alone were punctuated by moments of profound grief, not just for the loss of daily interaction with my grandchildren, but for the relationship with my son that had fundamentally changed. I questioned my decision during sleepless nights, wondering if I had acted too hastily, or if compromise might have been possible. The silence of my apartment after decades in a family home felt oppressive at times, a physical manifestation of my new solitude. Yet gradually, day by day, I established new routines and connections. Dorothy from my old neighborhood introduced me to the Resident Social Committee, where I found purpose organizing monthly health education presentations drawing on my nursing background. 3 other retired nurses in the complex and I formed a weekly coffee group, sharing professional war stories and current healthcare observations that stimulated my mind and provided much-needed laughter. My relationship with Brian evolved through careful negotiation. For the first month after my departure, communication was limited to logistics regarding remaining possessions and formal notifications of address change. Sandra, returning to California after helping me settle, became the reluctant intermediary, conveying messages between us when necessary. The ice began thawing through the grandchildren. 6 weeks after my move, Ashley allowed them to visit for an afternoon, dropping them off with terse instructions about pickup time. Jason and Emma's delight in exploring my new space and helping arrange my belongings reminded me that innocent hearts remained untouched by adult conflicts. During that visit, Emma used my phone to call Brian, excitedly describing my apartment and inadvertently opening a channel for direct communication. Subsequent visits established a tentative new normal. Brian began driving the children himself, initially waiting in the car but eventually accepting brief cups of coffee in my kitchen. Our conversations remained superficial for months, carefully avoiding the circumstances of my departure, but the rigid tension gradually eased. Ashley maintained her distance, never accompanying the family to my apartment but no longer actively preventing visits. Through the children's innocent comments, I gathered that financial pressures had indeed been significant, with Brian's company undergoing restructuring and Ashley transitioning to part-time work to accommodate family needs. This context didn't justify their treatment of me, but provided some understanding of the stresses that might have contributed to their behavior. A breakthrough occurred 6 months after my move. Brian arrived alone one Saturday morning, visibly nervous as he stood at my door holding a small potted plant. "Peace offering," he explained awkwardly. "It's a cutting from Dad's favorite rosebush." We sat at my small kitchen table, the silence between us heavy with unspoken words. Finally Brian spoke. "I handled everything wrong," he admitted, steadying his hands. "I let financial stress and Ashley's concerns about space overshadow what was right. I failed you and I failed Dad's memory too." It wasn't a complete apology, still containing hints of justification, but it represented progress. I acknowledged his gesture while maintaining my boundaries. "I appreciate you saying that," I told him. What hurt most wasn't the request for financial contribution, but how it was presented and the clear message that I was no longer welcome in what had been my home. "I never meant for you to feel unwelcome," he protested. "Intentions matter less than actions," I replied gently. "And your actions or inactions when Ashley and Patricia were disrespectful spoke clearly." This conversation marked the beginning of a slow rebuilding process. We established new patterns of interaction, with regular Sunday afternoon visits from Brian and the children. Ashley joined occasionally, our relationship polite but distant. Patricia had returned to her own apartment after my departure, another small validation of my suspicions about their ultimate goals for my space. Financially, my situation stabilized. The apartment consumed most of my pension, but careful budgeting allowed small pleasures. Richard helped me establish a modest trust for the grandchildren's education, ensuring that my remaining assets would eventually benefit them directly rather than flowing through Brian and Ashley's household. My relationship with Sandra deepened through regular video calls and her visits every few months. She had always been independent, establishing her life in California with minimal parental involvement, but our shared experience during my transition created a new dimension of mutual support and understanding. The broader impact of my experience led me to volunteer with the county's Elder Services Office, sharing my story with seniors considering property transfers to family members. "Get everything in writing" became my mantra, along with "love doesn't negate the need for legal protection." Richard occasionally joined these sessions, offering professional perspective on elder rights and estate planning options. Most significantly, I reconnected with myself as an individual rather than primarily as someone's mother or widow. I joined a senior painting class despite no particular artistic talent, enjoying the creative process without concern for results. I volunteered at the local hospital, providing comfort to patients lacking family support. I even accepted a dinner invitation from Walter, a retired pharmacist in my building, discovering the unexpected pleasure of male companionship without the pressure of romantic expectations. When I reflect on what I would have done differently, the answer is clear. I would have heeded Richard's advice about securing legal protections within the property transfer. A life estate would have protected my right to occupy the home, while still accomplishing my goal of helping Brian and his family. But regret serves little purpose beyond informing future decisions. The painful lesson I learned is that unconditional generosity sometimes enables entitled behavior, rather than gratitude. Family relationships, like all relationships, require mutual respect and clear boundaries. Love without limits can inadvertently create unhealthy dynamics that damage the very connections we hope to strengthen. Most importantly, I discovered resilience within myself that I hadn't known existed. Frank's death had shaken my identity and independence, leading me to seek security through family proximity at any cost. The subsequent betrayal forced me to rediscover my strength and rebuild my life on my own terms. While I would never have chosen this painful path, the woman I am today is more self-reliant, more discerning and paradoxically, more open to authentic connection than before. Last week, Brian visited alone, bringing news that Ashley had secured a better paying position, and their financial situation had improved. For the first time, he asked direct questions about my experience living with them, actually listening to my answers without defensive interruptions. While complete healing remains a work in progress, this willingness to acknowledge my perspective represented significant growth. As I enter my 69th year, I face the future with cautious optimism. My relationship with Brian continues to evolve, the grandchildren remain central to my life, and my new community provides both independence and connection. The journey from betrayal to rebuilding has taught me that sometimes the most loving choice we can make is to stand firmly for our own dignity, even when that stance creates temporary distance from those we love. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice between family peace and personal dignity? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this account of my journey has resonated with you or might help someone you know, please consider sharing it and subscribing to this channel. Remember that it's never too late to stand up for yourself with both compassion and strength. Thank you for accompanying me through this chapter of my life, and I wish you wisdom and courage in navigating your own family relationships.